I'm not telling you this because I want to. I'm not telling you this because talking about it helps, or because I've processed it into something manageable, or because some well-meaning person told me that putting words to it would make it smaller. It hasn't gotten smaller. If anything, it has gotten more precise, sharper at the edges, heavier in the specific places where I have to carry it. I'm telling you this because someone is at Laurel Divide right now. Tonight, probably. Or close enough to tonight that the difference doesn't matter. Someone with a unit number and a pack and a VHF radio that loses signal after midnight is sitting in that outpost, and they found the card in the supply cabinet, and they either read it carefully or they didn't. And I don't know which outcome I'm more afraid of. I was posted there for 11 nights. That's all. 11 nights on a ridgeline in the Great Smoky Mountains, solo night patrol. The kind of assignment that doesn't show up on your record as a punishment, even when everyone knows that's exactly what it is. I followed procedure. I kept my log. I ran my circuit. I did everything right. Eventually, and even now, I'm not sure that's what saved me, or whether saving is even the right word for what happened when I drove out at 0400 on the final morning. What I know is this: I count things now. I've counted things every day for 4 months. Exits in rooms, seconds during eye contact, words in a conversation, adding them up to make sure the total is correct, though I couldn't tell you what correct means or what happens if the number comes out wrong. I just count, and I can't stop. And I don't think that started in the mountains. I think that started the night I understood what the rules were actually for. Her name was Margaret Foley. She was 43 years old, experienced, properly equipped, and she made a navigational error in deteriorating weather on a trail I had walked 200 times. When her husband reported her overdue, I was the first ranger assigned to the night recovery operation. I had a grid. It was a good grid. The search coordinator had drawn it up in 20 minutes, and it covered the most probable terrain based on her last known waypoint and the weather window. I followed the grid for the first hour and a half. Then I deviated. It wasn't panic. That's the thing I need you to understand. I didn't deviate because I was scared or overwhelmed or exhausted. I deviated because I had 8 years of experience and a specific instinct about the drainage she would have followed when the rain made the marked trail impassable. My instinct was geometrically reasonable. I moved the search corridor 60 meters northwest of the assigned grid, and I swept it thoroughly. The grid found her 2 days later. She had been within 60 meters of my original assigned corridor. She had been alive when I passed. The medical examiner's report established the approximate time of death at somewhere between 2 and 4 hours after I moved off the grid. The language in the internal review was careful and precise, and thoroughly non-accusatory in a way that made the accusation impossible to misread. I never formally appealed the reassignment. I didn't want to. Precision and obedience felt like the only penance that made sense, not because the Park Service demanded them, but because I had decided that my instinct had been wrong in a way that had a name and a body attached to it. And I was not willing to trust that instinct again. Not for anything. Not ever. So when the lateral posting came through Laurel Divide Outpost, night patrol, solo assignment, minimal public interaction required, I said yes before I finished reading the sheet. I drove up for the first time at dusk, which in the Smokies means the light was already mostly gone by the time I left the pavement. The access road is technically listed as 1 lane, which is a generous description for what is actually a gravel track with aspirations. 4 miles from the highway, uphill the entire way, switchbacking through second growth timber that gives way to old growth the last mile before the ridge. And the old growth is a different kind of dark. The canopy is thick enough at elevation that it absorbs the remaining light instead of filtering it. And you arrive at the outpost in what feels like a fully completed night. If the clock says 1930. The station itself is a single-room clapboard structure that looks like it was built to be temporary and then simply never replaced. Western-facing porch over a valley that the locals call the Bowl, though it doesn't appear on any official map by that name. The valley collects fog after 9 in the evening cold air, draining down from the higher ridges, pooling in the low ground, producing a visual effect where the treetops below the outpost appear to be floating in gray water. It is genuinely beautiful for about 40 minutes before you understand that you can no longer see what is below the tree line because the fog has covered it. Inside, 1 main room, a log table, a VHF radio mounted to the wall on a steel bracket, a generator that runs on a tank refilled every 6 days by a service crew that comes and goes without interacting with the night ranger, a locked evidence locker bolted to the north wall, and a supply cabinet beside the door. The radio signal holds above 40% through most of the night. Below midnight, it starts to drop. By 0200, it's sometimes in the 20s, which means voice communication is unreliable, and you are operating on the understanding that a genuine emergency would require you to either hike 4 miles to the highway or deploy the emergency beacon in the supply cabinet, which would bring response within 40 to 80 minutes, depending on crew availability. I found none of this unusual. Remote postings have infrastructure limitations. This was a known variable. I noted it in my first shift log entry and moved on. What I noted, and then chose not to log, was that the valley below the porch was very quiet in a specific way, not the ordinary silence of a forest at night, which is actually full of sound once you learn to hear it, but a particular quality of quiet that felt less like absence and more like attention, like something large holding its breath. I told myself it was the fog, absorbing sound from below. That's a real phenomenon. Fog does absorb sound. I told myself that for 3 nights. The outgoing ranger left nothing personal behind. No note, no food in the cabinet, no extra batteries. Whatever he thought about this posting, he had kept it to himself and taken it with him when he left. His unit number was in the equipment manifest, and nowhere else. I never learned his name. I never found a photograph. And when I later tried to run the unit number through the district records, I got a file access error that I didn't have the clearance to investigate. What he did leave was the card. It was in the supply cabinet, taped to the inside of the door at eye level, positioned so that you would see it the first time you opened the cabinet to retrieve anything. Standard lamination, the kind you get from any office supply store, worn at the corners and along the bottom edge in the way that something gets worn when multiple people have removed it, read it, and replaced it over a period of years. The text was typed in a clean, plain font, formatted with deliberate structure numbered list, consistent spacing, a header at the top that read, Laurel Divide Outpost, Nocturnal Operational Protocol. No author, no date, no agency seal, no signature line. I took it off the cabinet door and read it at the log table, the way I read any operational document aloud, slowly, once through for comprehension, once through for retention. Rule 1. Do not confirm your location aloud after 2200 hours. Respond to radio check-ins with unit number only. Rule 2. If you hear your name spoken from below the ridge after 2300, do not respond and do not approach the sound. Log the time and return to the station. Rule 3. Keep the porch light on between 2100 and 0100. If it goes out for any reason, do not go outside to investigate or repair it until first light. Rule 4. Do not complete your nightly patrol circuit in less than 90 minutes. If you finish early, wait at the halfway marker until the time is met. Rule 5. If you find any object on the patrol path that was not there on your previous circuit, do not touch it, photograph it, or report it. Mark it with a single flag and note the GPS coordinate in the personal log only. Rule 6. Between 0000 and 0200, do not look directly at the tree line for more than 3 seconds. If you are watching the tree line and lose count, close your eyes and turn away immediately. Rule 7. At the end of every shift, before you sign the log, write the number of times you heard your name spoken during the night, even if the answer is 0. Do not leave this field blank. I stopped there and looked at the log on the table, the official Park Service shift log printed on standard forms in a binder that had come with the posting. I opened it to the first blank entry page. Halfway down the right column, there was a pre-printed field. Small label, clean type. It read, Name events, 0 if none. I read the remaining 3 rules. Then I set the card down on the table. I sat with it for a while. Then I put it back in the cabinet and told myself what any rational person tells themselves. Someone before me had a strange assignment here, developed some nervous habits, wrote them down in official-looking language because that's how rangers process unease, and laminated them because lamination is what you do when you want something to feel permanent. Field anxiety is real. Isolation produces ritualistic behavior. I had seen it before in long-term solo postings. This was that. I believed that for 2 nights. On the 3rd night, I was less certain. By the 4th night, I had stopped telling myself anything. I've had 8 years to develop a professional framework for evaluating operational rules. The first question you ask about any rule is, what is the failure mode it's designed to prevent? Most rules are obvious. Don't approach an injured bear. The failure mode is mauling. Mark trail hazards before nightfall. The failure mode is a visitor injury in darkness. Call in your position every hour. The failure mode is a downed ranger no one can locate. When I applied that framework to the 10 rules on the card, most of them produced failure modes I couldn't name. Rule 1 told me not to state my location aloud after 2200. The failure mode of that rule if you follow conventional safety logic, is that someone who needs your location can't get it, which is the opposite of safe. Every communications protocol I had ever been trained on required clear position reporting. Suppressing location data in a remote night posting was not nervous ranger superstition. It was a contradiction of foundational search and rescue doctrine. You don't write a rule like that because you're anxious. You write a rule like that because you've learned through something specific that broadcasting your position in that place after that hour creates a danger that outweighs the benefit. The question that created was, what is listening that shouldn't know where you are? Rule 4 bothered me in a different way. Every patrol protocol I had ever followed set a maximum response window, not a minimum completion time. You cover the circuit in under 2 hours. You don't wait if you finish early. Speed is safety. The rule inverted that entirely. It set a floor, not a ceiling. Completing the circuit too quickly was treated as the failure mode, which meant that moving through the patrol route faster than 90 minutes was dangerous in some way that slower movement was not. The question that created, does something need the full 90 minutes to be avoided? And if so, avoided from what? But Rule 7 was the one I couldn't explain away with any amount of professional reasoning, because Rule 7 had the pre-printed log field. The laminated card could be dismissed as one ranger's anxiety documentation. A typed list taped to a cabinet door has no institutional authority. But the name event field in the official log form was not something a ranger put there. That field had been added to the form at the print stage. Someone with access to the district's form templates, someone with administrative authority over this station's equipment, had decided that the number of times the night ranger heard their name spoken was data worth capturing every single night in an official document. That decision had been made before I arrived. It had probably been made before the previous ranger arrived. It was built into the station. Someone above my pay grade knew about the names, and they weren't talking about it. The patrol circuit at Laurel Divide covers approximately 2.3 miles of ridgeline trail, looping south from the Outpost to the halfway marker, a weathered wooden post with a reflector strip at the southernmost point of the circuit, and back north along the opposite side of the ridge before returning to the station. The terrain is moderate. No significant elevation change. The trail is maintained, marked with reflectors at 40-meter intervals, and mapped on the GPS unit in the supply cabinet with preloaded waypoints at every significant junction. Shift start is 2100. Equipment checklist before you step off the porch. GPS unit charged, confirmed waypoints loaded. VHF radio, channel 9, confirmed signal above 40%. Flashlight, primary and backup. Personal log, paper, pencil. Emergency beacon, armed but not activated. Bear spray, right hip. Flagging tape, left cargo pocket. That's the full kit. Takes 4 minutes to verify if you do it properly. The Smokies at night, on a ridgeline, in September, sound like this. Tree frogs below 3,000 feet. A steady pulse that drops off as you gain elevation, replaced above the frog line by wind behavior that is specific to ridge geography. Not a steady wind, but a tidal one, rising and falling on a cycle of roughly 40 seconds, moving through the canopy in a wave you can hear approaching from the south before it reaches you. Owls, occasional. Coyotes, rare at elevation. Distant traffic from the highway, compressed and directionless by the time it reaches the ridge, so that it sounds less like cars and more like a low, intermittent hum from somewhere below the fog. The fog itself arrives between 2100 and 2200 on most nights, filling the bowl below the west-facing porch with cold air that smells of wet pine and creek stone. Once the fog is established, the valley below the tree line is invisible. Not dark invisible, obscured invisible. A different quality of not seeing. The first 3 nights were genuinely quiet. I ran my circuit, kept my check-ins, logged my mileage, marked 0 in the name event field, and went off shift at 0500, feeling the specific satisfaction of a job that asks nothing more than careful execution. I slept well. I ate well. I thought, on the morning of the 4th day, that this posting might actually be what I needed, a place where the rules were clear, and the work was simple, and nothing depended on my instinct. I thought that right up until night 4. It was 21:47. I was 3/4 through the southern leg of the circuit, moving at my standard pace, not hurried, not slow, steady enough to keep the 90-minute window comfortably. My flashlight was on the trail ahead, picking up the next reflector marker. And I was tracking my GPS waypoint progress and managing my radio squelch in the background, the way you do when the work is familiar enough to allow partial attention. I had been hearing it for approximately 12 minutes before I consciously registered it. Not behind me, below me. Below the trail, below the ridge edge, where the slope drops away into the fog-covered bowl, there was a sound, keeping pace with my footsteps. Not matching them exactly, there was a slight lag, a half-second delay that made it feel like an echo at first, until I slowed down and the sound slowed down with me, that same half-second behind. And I understood that an echo doesn't adjust to pace changes. An echo is fixed to the source sound. This was responding to me. I stopped walking. The sound below the ridge stopped. Not immediately. With a half-second delay, the same delay as always, as if whatever was producing it had registered my stop and processed it before responding. I stood there for a full minute. Nothing moved below the ridge edge. The fog was solid from where I stood. I couldn't see the slope below the trail. I could hear the wind cycle moving through the canopy, the distant highway hum, the return of the tree frogs lower on the mountain. Nothing else. I completed my circuit. I logged it as probable wildlife, a deer, maybe, or a black bear moving through the lower slope, disturbed by my presence into parallel movement. It was a reasonable explanation. The half-second delay was harder to explain, but I was a professional, and professionals don't let ambiguous data produce outsized responses. I logged it as probable wildlife. I didn't believe my own log entry, but I wrote it, and then I went back inside, and I sat at the table for a while before I was ready to sleep. Night 6, 12 hours. I was on my second pass through the northern leg of the patrol circuit, moving at pace, when the sound below the ridge appeared again. Closer this time. Not dramatically closer. Maybe 15 meters closer to the trail edge than it had been on night 4. which doesn't sound like much until you understand that the ridge edge at that point of the circuit is only 25 meters from the trail. 15 meters of advancement meant the sound was now coming from somewhere roughly 10 meters below the drop-off, close enough that I could hear the ground disturbance. Whatever was moving through the slope vegetation was not small. My radio clicked for the hourly check-in before I had time to settle my breathing. The dispatcher's voice came through at roughly 30% signal flat, slightly compressed, the normal quality for that hour on the ridge. Unit check. All northern units. Identify. I keyed the radio. I know exactly what happened next because I have replayed it approximately 600 times in the 4 months since. The sound on the slope was close, and I was startled. Not panicked, but genuinely startled. And my professional reflex, 8 years of it, trained deep enough that it runs before conscious thought, sent my mouth moving before my brain caught up with the card in the supply cabinet. Ranger Marsh, Laurel Divide, I said. Grid 77, Ridge North, halfway circuit, all clear. Full identification, full coordinates, full position report. I had the radio away from my mouth and was already thinking about Rule 1 before the dispatcher finished acknowledging. I keyed again immediately. Unit 77, copy, and signed off. The slope below the ridge had gone quiet. I stood on the trail and counted my heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 15. I kept walking. I completed the circuit. I checked my watch when I came back up the south approach, and the porch light was visible through the tree line, and everything looked exactly as I had left it. 3 minutes and 50 seconds after I stated my coordinates, something was standing at the tree line in front of the station. I saw it through the porch window. From inside, I had come in through the back door. The habit I had already developed without consciously deciding to, and I was setting my pack down when I looked up and through the glass and saw the shape at the edge of the lit area, at the exact border of where the porch light reached the tree line. Not in the light, not in the darkness, at the exact boundary between the two. It did not move. I did not move. I watched it for 22 minutes. I know the duration because I tracked it on my watch, second by second, needing the precision of counting to keep my hands from shaking in a way that would have embarrassed me professionally. At some point, and I cannot tell you when, because I did not see it move, it was gone. The tree line was empty. The porch light lit the same strip of ground it always lit, and there was nothing at the edge of it. And I stood there looking at the empty space for another 6 minutes before I was confident enough to consider sitting down. I took the rules card out of the cabinet. I sat at the log table. I read all 10 rules again, slowly, the way I had read them the first night. But this time, I read them like instructions, because that's what they were. Nights 6 through 8, I followed the rules with a precision that I think surprised even me, given that a large part of my professional identity had always been built around following rules to the letter. I had not understood, before Laurel Divide, that I had developed a habit of following rules confidently, meaning with enough conviction in my own competence that I permitted myself small deviations when my judgment told me they were safe. I realized this only when I began following the 10 rules on the card in a state of genuine fear, which is a different cognitive posture entirely. Fear removes the confidence margin. Fear makes you precise in a way that competence never quite does. I did not confirm my location aloud on any check-in. I answered with my unit number only, and if the dispatcher asked for clarification, I told them signal was poor and signed off. Nobody pushed it. After 2300, I logged any sound from below the ridge without approaching it. The porch light stayed on. I timed my patrol circuits with my watch, pacing myself to come in between 90 and 94 minutes, waiting at the halfway marker in the dark if I was running fast. When the light from my flashlight found something on the trail that hadn't been there before, a broken branch on night 7, placed too deliberately to be windfall, I flagged it, noted the GPS coordinate, and kept walking. The shape did not return to the tree line. The sound below the ridge continued, but it stayed below the ridge. It did not advance toward the trail edge the way it had been advancing on nights 4 and 5. It kept its distance and its half-second delay, and its specific quality of seeming to register and respond rather than simply echo. I understood something, working through those 3 nights, that I have tried to articulate to myself many times since. The rules were not designed to explain what was happening at Laurel Divide. They were not a naturalist's guide or a threat assessment or a ranger's safety briefing. They were designed the way a controlled environment is designed not to remove the danger, but to manage the interaction with it, to establish parameters within which contact would occur at a predictable level rather than an escalating one. Following the rules did not make the thing go away. It kept it at a distance that the rules seemed to define. And somewhere in the back of my thinking, in the place where professional reasoning lives, I noted that the rules, knowing the right distance, implied that whoever wrote them had observed what the right distance was, had learned it empirically, from experience. The moral problem arrived on night 8, from below the ridge, in a voice I almost recognized. Night 8, 23:17 hours. I was inside the station, writing my mid-shift log entry when I heard it. The porch light was on. The generator was running its low, steady note. The radio was on squelch, producing the occasional soft chirp of distant traffic on the channel. Everything was where it was supposed to be, and from below, the ridge from the bowl, from the fog-covered valley, I could not see from any window at that angle. A voice said, "Help me," not my name, not a sound I could categorize as wildlife or wind or auditory artifact. A voice, female, approximately mid-30s by register, controlled but fractured. The specific vocal quality of someone who has been frightened for long enough that the acute edge of the fear has worn smooth, and what remains is endurance. I know that voice. Every ranger knows that voice. I have heard it from injured hikers, from lost hikers, from hikers who had been separated from their parties for 6 hours and were holding themselves together through controlled breathing and sheer refusal to let the fear win. It said, "Help me," every 45 seconds. I know the interval because I counted. 11 repetitions over the course of 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Each one at the same pitch, the same distance below the ridge, the same directional origin point, approximately 40 meters southwest of the outpost's western edge. The temperature at Laurel Divide on night 8 was 34 degrees Fahrenheit, dropping. Cloud cover was complete. The fog in the bowl was dense. A person in that valley, inadequately equipped in those conditions, would be in serious physiological danger within 2 hours. I knew that the way I know my own hand without calculating it, without consulting anything, simply as a fact that lives in the body. I stood at the interior of the station door with my hand on the latch, and I went through the rules. Rule 2 covered names. It covered my name specifically, spoken from below the ridge after 2300. It said nothing about generic distress calls. It said nothing about a voice saying, "Help me," in the voice of someone who was cold and scared in a fog-covered valley in 34-degree weather. Rule 2 had an explicit trigger condition, and this was not it. I was a trained ranger, currently on duty, and I could hear someone in distress approximately 40 meters from my position. I did not open the door. I stood there with my hand on the latch for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and I did not open the door. And the reason I did not open the door was not the rules and was not professional procedure. It was the half-second delay, the sound on the slope that adjusted when I adjusted, the shape at the tree line that had arrived 3 minutes and 50 seconds after I stated my coordinates, the pattern of escalation from night 4 to night 6 that had stopped escalating precisely when I started following the rules. My professional identity told me to open the door. My guilt about Margaret Foley told me to open the door, told me that the cost of not responding was a number I could not afford to carry, that I was already carrying one unbearable number, and adding another would be a weight I would not survive intact. But underneath all of that, under the duty and the guilt and the training, something much quieter was doing mathematics I didn't have a framework for, and arriving at a conclusion I hated. I logged the time. I logged the duration. I logged that I heard a distress-type vocalization from below the ridge, and did not respond, and did not approach. I wrote it in plain language, because plain language is what the log requires, and because I did not trust myself to write anything more interpretive without losing the factual record. Then I sat down, and I waited, and somewhere around 0015, the voice stopped. I logged the cessation time. Then I sat at the table with the rules card, and I looked at the pre-printed name event field at the bottom of the log page, the field that someone with administrative authority had decided was worth tracking. I wrote 0. First light at elevation in September arrives as a gray diffusion through the canopy, rather than any dramatic change in color. The fog in the bowl begins to thin. The tree frogs, silent since roughly 0200, start again at low volume in the drainage below the ridge. It is not beautiful exactly, but it is undeniable. The simple physical fact of another morning, arriving without your input or permission. I descended toward the bowl at 0540, not on the trail directly down the slope, through the old growth, moving toward the GPS coordinate I had estimated for the origin point of the distress calls. The frost was complete. In the Smokies in September, a complete frost means every horizontal surface, every leaf, every branch, every exposed rock and root and patch of bare soil is coated in a thin, even layer of ice crystals that crunch distinctly underfoot and hold the impression of pressure for hours after it's applied. I covered the slope for 40 minutes. I found nothing. No one present. Nothing. The frost was undisturbed. Completely undisturbed. Not a single compressed crystal. Not a broken leaf. Not a stem bent out of its natural orientation. I stood at the estimated origin point, and I looked at the ground, and the ground told me that nothing with mass had moved through it between the time the frost set, around 0300, and my arrival at 0540. Whatever had been producing a voice in this location for 8 minutes at 45-second intervals had done it without making contact with the ground at those temperatures. I stood there for a long time doing the arithmetic. Either no one had been there, in which case the voice had a source I could not identify, or something had been there that did not move through the environment the way a body moves through it, did not compress frost, did not displace vegetation, did not exist in the physical space the way existing in physical space works. I didn't know which answer frightened me more. I still don't. He was parked in the access lot when I came back up from the slope. An older truck, Forest Service green, one of the models they phased out before my time in the service. He was standing beside it, drinking from a thermos, watching me come up the access road with the specific patience of someone who has been waiting in a place for long enough that waiting no longer costs them anything. He identified himself as Dennis Hale, Ranger, semi-retired, formerly with the Western District, 61 years old by his own account. He did not explain how he knew I was posted at Laurel Divide. The assignment had been quietly processed. Minimal administrative footprint. Not the kind of posting that generates interdepartmental visibility. He did not apologize for arriving unannounced. He shook my hand once, looked at my face with the assessment efficiency of someone who has read faces professionally for decades, and then asked me 3 questions in sequence, without preamble, in the same tone you'd use to run through an equipment checklist. Are you following the rules on the card? I said, yes. How many times have you heard your name? I said, twice. Once on night 7, once on night 9. I hadn't told anyone about either instance. I had logged them as required, but I had not discussed them with dispatch, with my supervisor, or with anyone else. Hale received this information without any visible response. Has the porch light gone out? Not yet, I told him. He nodded once and finished his coffee. Then he said, good. That means you have time. He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed not by rote, but the way a specific sentence gets rehearsed when you've spent a long time deciding whether to say it at all. And the decision has finally resolved itself. I asked him how he knew about the card. I wrote Rule 4, he said. Someone else wrote the others. I added 4 after the second posting. I asked him what happened during the second posting. The Ranger finished his circuit in 68 minutes on night 6. He was a fast walker. He paused. He heard it complete the circuit after him. It came into the station lot at the 90-minute mark. He was inside by then. Lucky. He didn't sleep for the remaining 5 nights. Another pause. I added Rule 4 the following week. I stood in the access lot in the morning gray, and I understood, for the first time in a complete way, that the rules had been written by people who had been here and learned from it. Not theorized, learned. Hale told me about Cole slowly. The way you tell a story that you've been deciding to tell for a long time and have finally committed to, which means the deciding is over, but the telling is still hard. Cole had been posted at Laurel Divide 8 years earlier. A good ranger Hale's assessment, offered without qualification, which from a man like Hale meant something. Methodical, calm, the kind of person who did not produce problems for his supervisors or uncertainty for his colleagues. He served 13 nights at the Outpost. On the morning of the 14th day, a service crew driving up to refill the generator found Cole sitting against his truck at the bottom of the access road, physically unharmed, responsive to basic questions, medically cleared at the regional hospital by that afternoon. He could not account for approximately 6 hours of the previous night, but there was no physical evidence of injury, exposure, or any medical event that standard testing could identify. The hospital discharged him. He returned to service. And then, over the following 3 years, quietly, in the way that things accumulate quietly until they become impossible to dismiss, Cole's colleagues began to notice things. Cole used words he had no apparent reason to know technical vocabulary from fields he had no training in, place names from regions he had never visited, navigational references to terrain that didn't match any geography in his assignment history. He answered questions before they were completed. Not always, not consistently, but often enough that people began to hesitate before speaking around him. He retired early. Nobody formally documented any of it because there was nothing medically or professionally actionable to document. It was just wrong, in a way that the forms didn't have a field for. Hale said, 7 name events. That's how many Cole logged before the last night. I did the math without wanting to. I had logged 2. Night 9 was tonight. The pattern in Hale's telling was not ambiguous. He left before dark. He was explicit about the reason the rules applied to the assigned ranger. And he was a visitor. And he did not want to find out what the rules not applying to him meant in practice. Before he got in his truck, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed the evidence locker key on the porch railing beside me. Read the old logs, he said. All of them. Count the numbers. He drove down the access road without looking back. The locker is a standard steel field unit, gunmetal gray, bolted directly to the north wall, studs with 4-inch lag screws, the kind of installation that is meant to stay. I had seen it every shift and assumed its contents were routine administrative overflow, equipment spares, maybe legacy documentation from previous postings. Inside, a stack of shift logs bound with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it. The paper below dry and cool and smelling of old ink and mineral dust. 19 years of logs, 8 individual rangers, each set separated by a manila divider with unit number and posting dates written in pencil. 3 light bulbs in individual cardboard sleeves, identical to the bulb in the porch fixture. A topographical map of the Laurel Divide area, with 8 locations marked in red ink, not circles, not crosses, but a specific mark I didn't recognize. A short vertical line with a horizontal cross mark at the top, repeated at each location, all 8 within a quarter-mile radius of the outpost. A handheld audio recorder, the older cassette type, with a transparent housing. No batteries in the compartment. The cassette inside had been used. The tape was advanced approximately 2/3 through the reel. And a sealed white envelope, standard letter size, written on the front in neat block handwriting, black pen. Whoever is on night 11. I was on night 9. I set the envelope on the table. I did not open it. I placed the old logs beside it, and I began to read. All 8 rangers had logged name events. Every single one going back to the first posting 19 years ago. A ranger whose handwriting was large and slightly unsteady in the early entries, and became progressively smaller and more controlled as the nights accumulated, which I interpreted as someone working hard to manage something they didn't have language for. I charted the name event field across all 8 logs on a blank page of my personal notebook. Night 1, 0 for every ranger. Nights 2 and 3, 0. Night 4, occasional single entry. Night 5, 1 or 2. And then, beginning somewhere between night 5 and night 7, for each ranger, the numbers began to climb. Not dramatically. 1 additional event per night, roughly, on average. An escalation with the patience of something that was not in a hurry. 6 of the 8 rangers had a final log entry in their own handwriting. 3 of those final entries were brief and administrative. The entry was incomplete, cut off mid-sentence, where the date was written, and the rest of the shift fields were blank. Blank past the date means something interrupted the entry. 3 of those final entries were completed by a different hand-terse official. A single line noting that the assigned ranger had been located and removed from the posting. No further detail. 1 final entry was Cole's. It was complete. Every field filled in correctly. The name event field read 7. His handwriting was calm and even, and indistinguishable from his earliest entries. Whatever had happened to Cole, it had happened after he finished his log. And then the last ranger before me, the one who left the card in the cabinet and his unit number in the manifest and nothing else, had a final log entry with a name event count of 3. And then no further entries. Not incomplete, not administrative. Simply ended, mid-posting, with 3 as the last number in that field. I closed the logs. I sat at the table with the sealed envelope. Night 9 had not yet begun. I had 2 nights remaining. My current name event total was 2. The number 7 was not a coincidence. It was a threshold. And I was sitting at a table in a small room on a ridgeline in the dark, watching myself approach it by 1 increment per night. The porch light went out at 22:38. I was inside, preparing for my patrol circuit pack on the table. GPS unit confirmed, radio charged. I had not yet stepped outside. The generator was running normally. I could hear its steady, low note through the north wall, unchanged. The interior lights were on. The only thing that had gone out was the porch light. Rule 3 was explicit. If it goes out, do not go outside to investigate or repair it until first light. Rule 4 required me to begin my patrol circuit by 21:30 to complete the minimum 90 minutes by midnight. It was now 22:38. I had missed the window. To complete the circuit in 90 minutes, I would have needed to start at 2238 and be back by 0008, which was technically possible, except that Rule 3 prohibited me from going outside. I stood in the middle of the room and worked through it for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Following Rule 3 meant not completing my circuit. Not completing my circuit meant breaking Rule 4. Both rules existed on the same card, in the same official-looking format, with no hierarchy indicated and no exception clause for conflict scenarios. I chose Rule 3. Staying inside felt like the more immediate imperative. The porch light going out was an event the rule specifically named, and the rule's specific naming of it implied that the event itself was significant in a way that superseded the patrol requirement. I sat down. I did not go outside. At some point between 2240 and 0030, I can narrow it to that range, but not further. Something completed the patrol circuit. I know this because in the morning, on the patrol trail's south leg, there were impressions in the damp soil at the edge of the path. Not footprints in any recognizable sense. Compressed areas, evenly spaced, consistent in depth, traveling in the correct direction for the circuit at approximately the spacing I would produce at my standard patrol pace. They began at the halfway marker, the reflector post at the southernmost point, and continued north along the return leg until the trail merged with the station's access approach, where the ground hardened and impressions stopped recording. Whatever had walked my circuit had started at the halfway marker. The halfway marker is where Rule 4 requires you to wait if you finish your circuit early. I stood on the path, looking at the compressed soil for a long time. Then I went inside. That night, I heard my name 4 times. The running total was 6. 1 more, and I would match every terminal entry in the logs I had read. I had 1 night left. I opened the envelope. A single index card, unlined. The handwriting was neat and slightly compressed. The handwriting of someone who writes carefully when they know what they're writing matters. It said, "The rules will all be active simultaneously on your final night. We know that. We designed them knowing that. They cannot all be followed at once when the escalation reaches this stage. The timing makes it mathematically impossible. This is not a design failure. The rules are not designed to save you. They are designed to ensure it cannot follow you out. You are the ranger posted here. That is the only reason any of this works. Something about the assignment, the official designation, the patrol authorization, the formal posting establishes a perimeter it cannot cross without your participation. Every ranger who served here renewed that perimeter. Some of them paid more for it than others. Stay until 0400. Sign the log. Leave before first light. Do not look back at the ridge on your way out. We are sorry we could not tell you this at the beginning. Rangers who knew in advance did not stay. No signature, no date, no indication of who we was, or what authority they held, or how they had arrived at any of this." I read it 4 times. Then I set it on the table face down, and I sat with it in the silence of the station. And I thought about Margaret Foley, which is what I think about when I am trying to determine whether I am willing to pay a cost I cannot fully calculate in advance. I had deviated from the grid once. A woman had died. I had spent 14 months learning in every way available to me how to make sure I never deviated again. I put the index card in the evidence locker. I prepared my equipment. I set my watch alarm for 0400. Night 11 began. I stepped off the porch at 21:01. Equipment confirmed. Porch light on. Radio at 38%, which was normal for this hour, normal for this ridge, normal for a night that was otherwise the coldest of my posting. 29 degrees, clear sky. The fog in the bowl thin enough that I could see the upper canopy of the trees below the ridge edge. I started my timer. The patrol circuit on night 11 felt different in a way that is difficult to describe without sounding like I was imagining it. The trail was the same. The reflector markers were in the same positions. My GPS waypoints confirmed the same coordinates at the same intervals. But the quality of the surrounding darkness had changed, not darker exactly, but denser, in the way that a room feels different when someone is standing in it that you cannot see. I moved at my normal pace, and I kept my eyes moving, and I did not stare at the tree line, and I did not speak aloud. At waypoint 4, the object was on the trail. A ranger's badge. Not my badge, mine was on my chest. This one was lying flat on the trail surface, face up, as if placed there. The design was current issue Park Service, but the finish was wrong, oxidized in a way that takes years. The brass turned the specific dark brown of metal that has been exposed to weather for a long time. No Ranger ID number stamped on the back. Just the badge shape, the oxidized brass lying in the beam of my flashlight. I flagged it. I noted the GPS coordinate. I did not touch it. I did not photograph it. I kept walking. At 22:43, I heard my name. It came from below the ridge, to my south, in a voice that I knew immediately and have never been able to fully account for knowing. Margaret Foley's voice. Not an approximate version, not a facsimile her voice. The voice I had heard on the recording from her husband's description of it. The voice I had constructed in my mind during the 14 months since the recovery operation, with the specific exactness that guilt applies to the things it wants you to remember. My name, once, clearly, from below the tree line. I logged it in my personal notebook without stopping walking. My total was 7. I completed the circuit in 91 minutes. I came back up the north approach with the porch light visible through the trees and the station intact, and the access lot empty, and everything exactly as I had left it. I went inside. I set my pack on the table. I stood at the window, facing west, and I looked at the valley and the thin fog and the dark tree line below the porch light's reach. I did not look directly at the tree line for more than 3 seconds. At 0013, 3 things happened simultaneously. The porch light went out. My name came from below the ridge, the same voice, Margaret Foley's voice, except that this time it was not a single call. It was continuous, sustained. Not a call for help, not a question. Just my name, said over and over in her voice with the specific rhythm of someone reading from a list. And I realized, in the same moment, that I had been looking at the tree line since I came back to the window, and I did not know how long. I did not know when I had started. I did not know if it had been 2 seconds or 10. The rules converged in the space of 1 breath. Rule 3. The porch light was out. Do not go outside. Rule 2. My name was being called from below the ridge. Do not respond. Do not approach. Rule 6. I had lost count of my seconds at the tree line. Close your eyes. Turn away immediately. I closed my eyes. I turned away from the window. I stood in the dark interior of the station. The interior lights were still on. Only the porch light was out, with my eyes closed and my back to the window. And I ran the mathematics of the remaining rules in the dark. Rule 4 was impossible. I could not complete a patrol circuit with my eyes closed, in the dark, with the porch light out, and my name being called from the ridge edge. I made the decision consciously, with full awareness of what I was choosing. I was breaking Rule 4. I was choosing Rule 3 and Rule 6 and Rule 2 over Rule 4. I was making the triage decision the envelope had told me I would have to make. I sat down at the table with my eyes closed and my hands flat on the surface. The wood was cool under my palms, slightly gritty with dust and age. The generator ran its low note through the north wall. The radio produced its occasional squelch break. My name continued from below the ridge, uninterrupted, in a voice I knew. I counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 60. 1 minute. I started again. I counted minutes. I counted to 10, then to 20, then to 40. At some point, the voice below the ridge stopped, and I noted the cessation without opening my eyes, and I kept counting. At some point, the generator note changed pitch very slightly. A fluctuation, not a failure, and I noted it and kept counting. At 03:47 by my count, though I could not verify this without opening my eyes and looking at my watch, the quality of the air in the room changed in a way I cannot describe precisely, except to say that it felt like something that had been close became less close. A pressure differential that I only recognized in its absence. I counted to 0400. I opened my eyes. The porch light was on. I had not heard it come back on. I had not heard the circuit restore, or the fixture click, or any electrical sound indicating a change. It was simply on, the same warm yellow-white it had always been, throwing the same rectangle of light across the porch boards and out to the edge of the tree line. The tree line was empty. I sat at the table for 2 minutes before I moved, not paralyzed, but applying the same careful confirmation process I would apply to anything in a field situation that I needed to be certain about before acting on. The light was on. The sounds from below the ridge had stopped. The radio was producing normal squelch behavior. The generator was running at standard pitch. No movement visible through any window. I stood up. I opened the shift log. I filled in every required field with the same careful handwriting I had used for the previous 10 nights. Because the log is an official document, and official documents deserve care regardless of what you have just experienced. Equipment status, patrol mileage. I left the circuit notation incomplete, with a note indicating disrupted patrol due to Rule 3 activation at 22:38. Observation log. Wildlife notation, none. Name events, 0 if none, 7. I looked at that number for a long time. I had known what it would be since 22:43 on the circuit, knowing it didn't make writing it less significant. 7 was not just a number. 7 was the number in Cole's final entry. 7 was the number that ended every terminal log in the evidence locker. I had arrived at it, and I was still in the station, and my handwriting was steady, and I was cognitively intact in every way I could verify from the inside. I signed the log. I picked up my keys and my pack. I took the rules card from my breast pocket and put it back in the supply cabinet, taped to the inside of the door at eye level where the previous ranger had left it. Then I walked out of the station, through the front door, across the lit porch, down the access road, and I did not look back at the ridge. The drive out took 19 minutes to the highway. The highway felt like a different physical reality, the width of it, the reflectors, the painted lines, the eventual appearance of other headlights in the distance. I pulled into a gas station in Gatlinburg at 04:31 and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I was ready to go inside and buy a coffee. In the weeks that followed, I tried to construct a complete theory. I am a methodical person. I document things. I work from evidence toward conclusion. What I arrived at after 4 months of that process is not a theory in any satisfying sense. It is more like an architecture. Laurel Divide Outpost is not a ranger station that acquired strange rules over time. The strange rules preceded the ranger station. The station was built around a set of requirements for managing a contact interface, a specific location where something that exists in the forest makes regular attempts to extend beyond its territory, and a specific protocol for limiting the extent of that extension. The ranger is not there to patrol the ridge. The ranger is there because the formal designation of an authorized human presence at that location is part of what the protocol requires to function. Someone, at some institutional level above what I can access, understood this and built a maintenance system around it. Every ranger who served there renewed the perimeter. Every ranger paid something for it. The payment scaled with the name event count, with how many times the entity had been able to call the ranger's name before the posting ended. More name events meant more data gathered, more vocal resonance captured, more of whatever it collects during those interactions taken from the interaction. At 7, something transfers. Not visibly, not with any event you can point to. Cole drove home and went back to work and said words in languages he didn't speak and knew places he had never been. I drove home and went back to work and began to count things compulsively in a way I cannot stop and cannot fully explain. What transferred to me in 7 instances of hearing my name in my own wilderness in the dark, I don't know yet. I have a sense that I will understand it gradually. The way you understand that a room has changed when you can't immediately identify what moved. What I know is that I did not choose this posting randomly. The reassignment after Margaret Foley was administratively quiet, minimal footprint, offered before I finished reading the sheet. Someone put me at Laurel Divide specifically. Someone chose a ranger who was pre-committed to following rules without deviation, who had a wound that would make him stay inside when every instinct said otherwise, who would be precise enough to hold the containment, but broken enough not to question his presence there until it was too late to matter. I have been trying to find out who made that decision for 4 months. I have not found them yet. My colleagues have noticed something, not anything they can articulate with precision. I have listened carefully for for any specific statement, and what I get instead is a feeling I recognize from the other side of it, the feeling of something being slightly misaligned in a way the available vocabulary doesn't quite reach. They call me reliable now. More reliable than before, they say, which they seem to mean as a compliment. My patrol logs are more complete. My radio check-ins are more consistent. My incident documentation is more thorough. What they don't know is that the reliability is structural rather than chosen. I don't produce gaps in documentation because I cannot stop counting. I cannot miss a check-in because the tracking of intervals is now continuous and automatic. Running underneath everything else, I do the way a background process runs, underneath a computer's visible operations. I count exits in every room I enter. I count seconds when anyone holds eye contact for longer than casual. I count the words in conversations, adding them toward a total I do not have a name for, checking the running sum against some internal threshold I cannot consciously identify. I don't hear Margaret Foley's voice anymore. That stopped the morning I drove out of the access road. What replaced it is quieter and harder to describe a low, continuous awareness of being attended to. The specific feeling of existing inside someone else's field of perception, like standing in front of a window in a lit room at night, and knowing, without being able to see, that someone is outside looking in. It does not spike. It does not intensify. It does not threaten. It is simply always present in the way that a sound you've lived with long enough becomes indistinguishable from silence. I function. By every professional and medical metric, I function well. I have not sought psychological evaluation because I do not know how to explain what happened in terms that would produce a useful clinical response. I have not sought a new posting because I do not know what a new posting would mean, whether the thing that transferred with me travels with me, or whether it is fixed to the ridge and I simply carry the mark of having been its contact point for 11 nights. I don't know yet. I keep counting. I keep working. I keep looking at the exits. Someone is at Laurel Divide tonight. I don't know their name. I don't know their unit number, or their history, or what they did to end up posted at a remote outpost on a ridgeline 4 miles from the nearest paved road with no cell service and a VHF signal that drops below 40% after midnight. I don't know if they found the card in the supply cabinet, or if the outgoing ranger took it when they left. But I know the posting exists. I know it was filled. And I know that somewhere up on that ridge, right now, the fog is collecting in the bowl, and the porch light is on, and something below the tree line is moving through the slope vegetation at a half-second delay. If they found the card, they read Rule 1, and they're wondering what's listening for their coordinates. They read Rule 2, and they're wondering how it knows their name before it arrives. They read Rule 3, and they're sitting inside in the dark, looking at the porch light and hoping it stays on. They read Rule 4, and they slowed down at the halfway marker and stood in the cold alone and counted minutes. They read Rule 5, and they flagged something on the trail and kept walking. And they don't know what they flagged or what flagging it prevents. They read Rule 6, and they're keeping their eyes moving and counting seconds, and they don't know yet What happens at 4? And they wrote 0 in the name event field tonight, or 1, or 2, and they don't know yet what the number is for or where it's going. I have been reciting the rules since I left, all 10 of them, in order, without the card, without hesitation, correctly, every time. I recite them in the morning when I wake up, and I recite them at night before I sleep, and I recite them during the quiet moments at work, when the background counting drops to a level where language can surface through it. I don't decide to recite them. They surface the way a number surfaces when you've been adding long enough that the sum is simply there. I said I'd know when I understood what had transferred. I think I know now. I'm not reciting the rules to remember them. I'm reciting them because something needs the next ranger to know them perfectly before they arrive. And I don't know how to stop.